show of hands, who here wanted to be Bill Gates at some point in their lives? What's the average age here? Anyone for like Howard Hughes, Cornelius Vanderbilt? I don't know what we're pushing here. Yeah, right there. Gotcha. When I was 12, I wanted to be Bill Gates. And I used to sit in my bedroom, convinced that no Microsoft spies could possibly reach me there. And I would sketch out my Windows killer. You know, I was convinced the life of a pasty computer nerd, drinking milk and driving Porsches way too fast was for me. But a couple years later, my interests had diversified a little bit. I decided that if I was going to build a space elevator before I hit the age of 30, I needed to spend more time on things that mattered, like organizing all of my various companies into subsidiaries, and not on things that didn't matter, like the fundamental laws of physics, or raising billions of dollars in startup capital. What's interesting is, in growing up, we often lose the long view. What interested me then still interests me today. I'm still interested in big, world-changing problems. But all too often, we spend way too much time talking about stuff like tweet timing and the time talking about how we're going to build the next global game-changing companies. There was an interesting article in Toronto Life recently called The App Kings. Meet the army of tech genius millionaires who are turning Toronto into the new Silicon Valley. And several people here have already expressed their dissatisfaction with the term Silicon Valley North. But I'll share a personal perspective on that. I grew up in Ottawa during the tech boom. And it was interesting because they called it Silicon Valley North then as well. But in the midst of all the backslapping about Nortel and Corel and how their stock just kept rising and rising and rising, we missed a fundamental issue. There was an elephant in the room that nobody wanted to address, and it was this. Silicon Valley was about world-changing innovations. Over the last 50 years, some of the most important innovations in the world have come out of there, from microprocessors to relational databases to smartphones, and some new ones like low-cost rockets and electric sports cars. From those innovations have come world-changing companies, big global companies like Oracle and Intel and Google and Apple. The interesting thing was that in Ottawa, we really had none of that. We had a couple of megalomaniacs like Michael Copeland, who started desktop publishing software companies that quickly tumbled. But we didn't have the kind of lasting innovation ecosystem that would build the entrepreneurial economy of tomorrow. In that case, thinking small hurt us. We need to think bigger. We need to build global companies. But why is that important? In the last decade, it seems like a lot of the talk has gone to building small, nimble companies. And the thinking has been that most innovation will come from small, nimble companies. So where's the data to support this idea that global companies are the way to go? Well, it's pretty obvious. All the data seems to show that high-growth companies, that is companies going from very small to very large, have the greatest contribution to things like GDP, jobs, and productivity growth. If you look at the top 100 R&D spenders in Canada, the top 7 are Canadian companies. Number 1 is RIM at $1 billion a year. And it's only people like the RIM founders who could fund things like the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. So if you look at that, you have to think that, well, global companies are important, but we really are not good. In fact, we downright suck at turning small companies into big ones. As John said, we're an economy of small companies and really big ones. We don't bridge that gap very well. Another indicator that demonstrates this is venture capital spending. It's often used as a proxy for innovation. If you think about the fact that in the US, 21% of all GDP is contributed to by venture-backed companies. In Canada, venture-backed companies contribute 1% to GDP. This was a study done by the National Venture Capital Association in the US. It's pretty clear that we have a problem. We need to think much, much bigger. We need to build global companies. Now, I have a lot of respect for the people who have built companies in Toronto. And I think that the article itself was actually a great milestone for us, but it wasn't a watershed moment. We need to build the companies of tomorrow. We need to diversify and build a sustainable ecosystem. Not just the mobile companies, while they're great, but other types of companies as well. We need to build and find companies like SpaceX, entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, and the Google founders, who in their spare time are building autonomous cars. These are the kind of challenges that excite me. You know, about 100 years ago, Sir Wilfrid Laurier when he was first elected as the first French-Canadian Prime Minister, said this. He said, the 19th century is the century of Canada. Or rather, sorry, the 19th century is the century of the United States, but the 20th century will be the century of Canada. He was really wrong about that. In a lot of ways, we lagged behind. But look at where we stand today. We do live in one of the greatest countries in the world, both as measured in quality of life, in our access to healthcare, to jobs, to great housing, but also in our business climate. We have low corporate tax rates. We have a very generous tax credit program for research and development. We have immigrants from all over the world with business ties back home to almost every country on every continent, except for maybe Antarctica. So I would posit that the real challenge is that we're just not aiming big enough. We're not dreaming big enough dreams. And so I think there are a couple things we can do. Venture capitalists, angel investors, other investors, if someone comes to you with a crazy idea, like, I want to build a robotic vacuum, or a space elevator, or something like that, hear them out. Encourage them even. And yes, consider funding them. Entrepreneurs, think a little bigger. There are vast global unsolved problems beyond all the stuff that we're looking at today. In biotechnology, in renewable energy, even in, yes, mobile technology. It's still a vast playing field. We need to start building those today, not by looking at the problems of today, but by looking at 5, 10, or 20 years and thinking, what will be different then? How will we live? And above all, most importantly, when people tell us that our ideas are crazy or unfeasible, that we can't or that we shouldn't, I urge you to channel the words of another great and iconic Canadian and say this: just watch me.